There. I am Dr. Maya Green, also known as Dr. Maya 100, coming at you from Rolling Out's Health IQ today. We're going live, and today I have an esteemed guest who, within 5 minutes, brought me to my roots. You know how people will take you to your roots, like, you think you know something, let me tell you something. So I'm honored to have Mr. Richard Rhodes here so he can tell us something. Richard Rhodes is the president of the Atlanta NAACP branch, one of the nation's oldest and most prestigious civil rights organizations. Richard is a 1970 graduate of Clark College, now Clark Atlanta University. As the president of the Atlanta NAACP branch, one of his most promising goals is to increase the number of Black registered voters. That's right, increasing the number of Black registered voters and finding ways to get more African Americans to the polls. Welcome, Mr. Rhodes. How are you? Thank you for joining us.
Great. I'm so glad to meet you. I'm glad to be here. We are continuing in the struggle, in the fight. We have work to do. This is just part of the work. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So taking it to within the first 5 minutes, anyone who's talking with you knows about your community work. And we really need more advocates like you because our community is facing something very important that we address. And just like what our community has experienced at the polls and the work you do getting us to the polls, look at what our community is experiencing in the face of COVID, right? And vaccinations, and having those discussions and meeting us where we are and taking us wherever we are going. And so I want to talk a little bit about the community and COVID vaccinations today, if that's okay.
Oh, that's great.
Awesome. So, as you do this work in the community, you just mentioned traveling. You were talking about how you travel during the work. Do you see a role for vaccinations in our community?
Well, vaccinations are really a part of the social structure of where we are now. I mean, vaccination is nothing new.
Mm-hmm.
I was a kid. The big deal was the polio scare. So they actually brought first it was the salt vaccination, which was actually inoculation. And then later on, there was another developed called the Savin vaccine, which was an oral vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
They put it on sugar cubes, put it on our tongues. And so, I'm still here without polio. But polio was a big scare. It was a virus. And so it was something that people were afraid of. They had pictures of patients in the iron lung because their lungs, their respiratory system had shut down. And so that is the vision that I see about new diseases. I think about the polio scare of the 50s and 60s. And I say, hey, so when this new disease came along, I had confidence that a vaccine would be developed. I just didn't know how long it would take and what the ramifications might be. But I had confidence in the medical profession because I'm a college grad. I knew those biology and chemistry nerds from Clark College who went on to become physicians or anesthesiologists or epidemiologists, and I know they were serious about what they did. And I said I had every confidence that a vaccine would be developed.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. You just said a lot, right? And so I just want to start and unpack some of the stuff. You mentioned all those, you said nerds that you knew at Clark Atlanta University, being able to grow up and live and live life alongside of people who are now medical advisors, healthcare professionals, things like that. I think is important for our community. What three people in your trusted medical network do you look to as advisors?
Well, I look at my primary physician first.
Mm-hmm.
And in Atlanta, if it's a new disease or a new version, I go on the CDC website and read about it. And then the third thing is I have actually family members who are in the medical profession. And I will ask them. I got two cousins. Their parents are my peers. One's in Memphis, one's in New York. And so I know they see different things. And so I'll call them up and say, hey, what do you think about this? You know, in the case of this COVID-19, I absolutely had several conversations about it. And so I'm an accountant by training, by trade. I'm a certified public accountant. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we do research. I mean, analysis and research is by training, by profession. And so I believe in that process. And so that's who I consult.
That's right. And so then you mentioned a couple of things. You said you go to the CDC. Is that website cdc.gov?
It is cdc.gov.
Okay. And, you know, being someone who was always in the books, I learned that to be one of the nation's most reliable institutions that make decisions and put decisions out about when it's COVID and put notifications out when it's COVID here, if there's a second surge, a second or third or fourth surge, those type of things. So that's cdc.gov. And thank you so much, just dropping that knowledge and giving us that. I do want to unpack another thing you mentioned. You mentioned when the polio vaccine came out, it came out in stages. And, right. And I think there's a Sankofa tradition that Sankofa means we gotta go. It's an African tradition or a term. We have to know where we come from to know where we're going. So I like that you, for me, dropped that knowledge about polio and the vaccines coming out in stages. And every time it sounds like they had the salt, you said, I never heard that. And then they updated the vaccine as they knew, but the salt and the first ones helped us move to get to where we're going, you know? So I thank you for dropping that knowledge, you know, because not a lot of people know that.
Right. Well, you know, the good thing about getting to be 73 years old is that what's history to some of you young people was current events for me.
I hear that. You talk about it because I was thinking, you know, none of us, and I will call myself young, you know, none of us have polio, right. You know, and when you think about the reason why, it was because you got the vaccine. Right. And so thank you for that. And so how did you feel so coming back to COVID or polio, how did you feel when there was no vaccine versus kind of where we are now when there's a vaccine for COVID-19?
Well, for me as a child, I was afraid of polio, and the medical community says, hey, you know, if it gave the symptoms and, you know, be careful. We would advise that young people to take a nap, you know, during the day to try to build your resistance and other precautionary things, much like the precautions that the CDC gave out in the early months of the pandemic. You know, in other words, to avoid the infection, because we cannot cure the infection. We know that the medical community cannot kill viruses, you know, in your body. We have not cured the common cold, the influenza, but all of that research, all of those attempts to bring cures and treatment have led us to the COVID-19 vaccine and others. You know, I mean, we had the Ebola virus a few years ago that decimated portions of Africa that successfully, I think it was only one or two cases that I read about that were actually in the United States of America. And so again, we see the work and we trust the work. We don't think that any of us is perfect. Only God is perfect. But they in the high 90s, so that's good enough for me.
I hear that. So tell me, you mentioned something, and thank you for being so transparent. At the beginning of what you just said, you mentioned when polio first hit, when COVID first hit, you used the word fear. Right. And something we see is there are a lot of people out there, and sometimes fear makes people do different things. Right. It makes people act And for a lot of people, fear causes people to become paralyzed or go into a waiting mode where they're not acting on getting a vaccine or not acting on sheltering in place, and not, just more, I want to put it over there. It doesn't apply to me. I want to make it go away. What information helped you to decide when it was time to get vaccinated and push from that place that you were talking about into action? What information helped you to decide whether or not to get vaccinated?
Well, again, with my history,
Yeah.
I knew that the scientists would be working on a vaccine. I mean, because we know measles, rubella, smallpox, polio, chicken pox, all of these things we've had vaccines for, and now they're pretty much, wiped out in America. And I know, for example, that if you had chicken pox at an early age, you could get shingles in your later years. Yeah. So I know that these things remain in your system in some form, because the body will build up defenses on its own. And what I noticed is that these vaccines help that body build up these defenses against these invaders in our body in the form of viruses or bacteria. And that prior knowledge made me convinced that once the vaccines went through trials, because there's always trials before new medicines are released to the public, that it was worth a try. In my own situation, I don't have some of the well-known comorbidities like high blood pressure. I'm good. I don't have diabetes, but I am asthmatic. And the last thing an asthmatic wants is any disease that interferes with the respiratory system. And so based on that, I decided that when a vaccine became available, I would take it. At the point, there were two vaccines. There was a Pfizer and that was the Moderna. In talking to medical professionals, they all recommended the Moderna, which was 2 shots versus the single Pfizer shot. And I listened to them.
Yeah, a lot of people did take Moderna, which is the initial part was 2 shots. That's the initial one. And then now for people with immunocompromised, there's that additional dose and some boosters. So a lot to kind of get in touch with someone that you know and trust and follow up with. So thank you for that. A lot of people are experiencing depression, isolation, those type of things, because there are 2 parts to every disease, right? It's right. What the virus, or in this case, is going to do, but it's how we react as humans. And that second part, if we miss it, that first part never gets dealt with, right? So one thing I'm saying is mental, like depression, anxiety, those type of things. Have you seen that in the community? And do you feel like things like social distancing, things like that play a role in what our community is experiencing as far as mental health now?
I don't think there's any doubt. Black people, particularly in the South, we greet each other with a hug,
Yep.
And so when that became, not the thing to do anymore, it affected us all. I remember going to one of the first meetings, and everybody remarked, "Oh, it's so good to see everybody." To see it. We haven't seen each other. We've been talking on the phone or doing virtual meetings like this one, but just to be in the room with other people. We are social. Man is a social animal. And of course that has affected us. It's affected school children and to a large extent. We see a lot of I think too much violence in high schools because of the lack of social interaction for a couple of years. And honestly, mental health professionals should be used more, I think, to get us over this trauma of the pandemic. Make no mistake about it. This has been traumatic. And I think that we have to recognize it. One of the things that one of the reaction that people have about a situation like this is they escape into a realm of denial.
Yeah.
As if it doesn't exist. That's their defense. The defense is denial, and which is obviously a psychological issue. But we have to be honest about what is needed in the community and still try to connect with each other, and to make it better, and reassure people that there is light at the end of the tunnel. There's an adjustment that we all have to make, and let's work together for the betterment of the community.
Wow. And, I love that you said that, because that is exactly what social activism is about, and applying it to the situation in COVID. Why is it so important that we have people like you that are saying the things you're saying about focusing on, okay, how can we get better in every single situation? COVID, how can we get better outside of COVID? How can we get better? Why is social activism important in health?
Because pressure and stress affects our health.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. We used to say in college that pressure will burst a steel tank. And so it is important in the study of, I went to school as a math major, switched over to business and accounting, but in this role as president of the Atlanta NAACP, I've had to go back and study more psychology. We had a psychology course in college, but I had to understand the psychology of oppression and how it affects us on a day-to-day basis. And so when you add a medical issue on top of that already kind of a volatile situation, it can create some of the situations that we face around the country. So mental health is a big issue for people who have lived in an oppressed stage. Sometime when I talk to people, I remind them that a soldier can go off to Afghanistan under extreme traumatic conditions, come back home and have to have years of therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder. Black people live currently under traumatic stress every day in many situations. The younger we are, it's not so much, but some, depending on the economic situation. I grew up in a household, my mother was a teacher. I had my own bed, I had a place I could study. There are children today that do not have. They may not walk in the house, they don't know where they're sleeping tonight. And they don't have a quiet place to study, and they don't have a food. My refrigerator, my mother's refrigerator was always full. I never missed a meal. Some kids don't have that. And so we have to be mindful of the differences based on the oppressive racist society that we live in, that we have to endure, and we have to lend a hand out to others. If we are strong enough, some others may not be.
Oh, you said a lot there. The psychology of oppression. Wow, that opens up so much, especially during COVID. And then you got into what is the psychology of oppression when we say things like shelter in place, and that's a luxury for some people,
right?
And that's going to be the solution. What other aspects have you seen the psychology of oppression? First, if you have time, break that down, and then in COVID, where have you seen that play out?
So there are only two objectives to oppression. Those are deprivation, which deprive you of your resources and deprive you of an opportunity to obtain resources, and degradation, which takes away your self-worth. Those two elements are included in all of these COVID-related issues. If you don't have resources, right? It makes it tougher to endure. If you don't feel worthy of getting better, or if you don't feel that there's a possibility to get better. The two strongest emotions that come out of oppression, sustained generational oppression, are anger and apathy. Anger and apathy. And so apathy tells us, well, I'm not going to take this vaccine, and whatever happens, what happens. Or I'm not going to vote. Whatever happens, happens. No point in me going to school. It's not going to work out. And so those things that that I understand from the product of oppression is elevated when it comes to a pandemic like COVID-19, where people have never seen it before, they don't understand it, and which makes us fertile ground for infections.
Ooh, that, you just broke down a lot. And there's a lot of us kind of out here experiencing that on a lot of levels, right? No matter what our degrees are, no matter what, our socioeconomic background is, a lot of African Americans it's really hitting hard right now. People say COVID ripped a Band-Aid off a long-standing wound.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
So when someone is experiencing that, in your experience, in what you do for our community, what are some of the ways we can kind of start to reverse or maintain our health right now? And also some of the ways where in COVID, out of COVID, we can join together and undo, everyday wake up and kind of undo the society, or is that possible?
Well, it's possible, obviously, and it's hard work. What we have to do is do meetings like this, where we talk frankly and openly about some of the underlying issues. I'm sure other white medical professionals don't understand the psychology of oppression like you would, because they've never experienced it. And some of them may not even acknowledge that it exists because they have not experienced it, they don't even understand it. So we have to continue to talk about these things, continue to bring information to the masses from trusted voices as well. A new message is better received by an old trusted messenger. And so we have to do that. One of the things we've done in Atlanta, we've toured 8 additional cities other than Atlanta to talk about all of to bring information about the COVID vaccine, talk about some of the misinformation that goes around. It is presenting information from a trusted voice like the NAACP that's been around since 1909.
Yeah, a lot of people think it's going to be the medical provider that's going to get this message out and explain it and break it down in the community. And it's not. I've seen it over time and time again. And even the more so with the COVID vaccinations, there are people that have already been in the community, because it's not necessarily the degree, right? It is the experience and what you've done for the community that opens that door to even have these conversations. And in your conversations, just as you wrap up, what are some of the experiences or perspectives that people are experiencing around COVID, like some of the myths, some of the things that may not be true? Go ahead and break that down better than I ever could.
So one of the biggest myths is, a young man said to me, this was when the vaccine first came out, and he said, well, you know what happened in Tuskegee, don't you? And I said to him, now, I know what happened in Tuskegee, but do you know what happened in Tuskegee? And then I went on to explain to him that it was a study of syphilis infected patients at Tuskegee, and that at the time when they started, there was no recognized cure for syphilis. But even when by 1942, penicillin was recognized as a cure for syphilis and was still withheld from those patients. And I said, it wasn't about a bad vaccine. it wasn't about bad treatment. It was about no treatment. And so, that opened, I said, Google Tuskegee experiment or study, and see if I'm wrong, then you can come back. If I'm wrong, call me up and tell me I was wrong. I've never received that phone call because I knew, again, we look at things, we get a lot of information first. NAACP, we get calls about everything. They won't pick up my trash. They won't let me in the house. I can't vote. I lost my driver's license. And so we see it firsthand. We saw Black funeral homes who were so busy from COVID deaths that they couldn't pick up bodies for days. So those are the things, that's sort of like a rebound. We see the effects of them. And then when we dig down, we say, okay, this is what's happening. So, we're in a good position. We feel the pulse of the community, and we want to serve it as best we can.
Now, a lot of times in medicine, we look at kind of what's going on over East, and the flu, COVID, it all comes from East and travels West. And that's been an experience since ever, as we see what's happening, and we don't know if it's going to be another surge. We do know the numbers are going to rise to some extent. Do you have, as we wrap up, one piece of advice that people should use, or one piece of advice people should think about as we go through this? People say COVID is over. I see it creeping up a little bit. What is one piece of advice that we can hold on to protect our families and our tribe?
I think we should look at the medical profession as the smartest kid in your class and trust that kid that he would not do you any harm. The medical profession at first is do no harm, and listen to the science, and listen to other leaders, people who have taken the vaccine, and remember that we don't have smallpox, we don't have polio, we don't have measles anymore, and that's because of vaccines.
Wow, you said a mouthful. We don't have it because there was vaccines,
Right.
Thank you so much, Mr. Richard Rhodes, for joining us, not only joining us on Health IQ right now today, this live, but thank you for what you have done. Receipts, well, what I call on the south side of Chicago, receipts in the community. When they got them receipts, you can say, yeah, I know about Tuskegee, but do you? Like when I said, I went to Alabama A&M, you're like, oh yeah, you did? Okay, well, do you know this about Alabama A&M? Thank you so much for the continued legacy that you're living and creating. And thank you so much for your service to our community. Any last words?
No, I encourage people to read, join your local NAACP. We got voting coming up. We need to get that. Be active in the entirety of your community. If you can help somebody else, lend a hand.
All right, Dr. Maya 100 for rolling out. Encouraging people, if you want to find out more information, go to www.vaxxedup, that's VAXXEDUP.org, www.vaxxedup.org. Thank you so much. We're signing off. We'll see you on the other side.